of architect André Fontes,
que nos irá falar sobre estes novos desafios da habitação
and
depois.
you'll talk a bit about some challenges that we currently have.
Obrigada.
Good afternoon. As an architect, I'll use a lot of images. This collaboration of people in this kinds of project is very transforming. And me and Andre, we are directors in office with different initiatives, the publication of books. We also debate a lot, especially in the Assembly of Republic. And we work towards using what we think it's important. And one of the things that made us really happy and that we suggested was the being able to actually rent. Usually we think about housing as merchandise. It could be, but in the norm, it isn't. Habitating means being in the house in the time. And that space and time identifies us. And as architects, engineers have this responsibility to understand that the process of choosing and defining the place where someone will live, it's a very important matter. It doesn't matter to have a house that has nice nice places. It's way more than that. And that's why the examples that we saw before is very crucial. And we were into projects of collaboration, which was the working on an island. And so there was a lot of frustration of what was going on that island and how we could change that island. And so we went with an invite that had our laboratory think and find ways, which allowed us to know what we actually needed to do. And so we had a lot of ideas when we entered the island. But it also gave us the strategy of staying in the island for 2 years, a bit more than 2 years, with architects, engineers, sociologists. And during that time, more than just results that were shaped by what someone would actually want, we also saw the reality, and we understood how that was important for the rehabilitation of this place. We got to the conclusion that everything there was made with a lack of resources. So those were the most important points that we looked to actually do. So we had, instead of reinventing the wheel, we redid it, we copied it. And so we copied what they did, but we did it better. The process was very difficult because living in an island with residents with difficulties, with their own personalities, which means that we were taking a space that was originally already used. But we have the conscience that architecture is very important and it has a place. Posma says that. Posma says that architecture has way more importance other than the visual part. And it's not just bringing the architecture towards this. In that way, we also compromise the people. And that's what made this something akin to a architecture school. And there's a second project that we did in Porto that has a lot of population density. We did 70 houses towards social park. I could live there, not because I don't have the money to buy a more expensive house, but because I want to live there. But it also makes it, just because they live in Block D from a certain area, these are specific things that architects have to understand, that they have to put it aside. When I went to an island, it was, oh, I want to live here, but I want by where I already live. It's an understanding of what you actually need. What changes the necessity in a housing and social housing is that when I do an architectural house, I think of it, if there's dignity and if I would allow myself to live there. And many times people ask me if I presented images, but sometimes I thought that, is this needed? Should I think of this more deeply? 52% of families in Portugal live from 1964 euros, and 32% gain from 1962 to 1200, which means that the family that live in the lower class would only be able to pay for a house that's 40,000. Those 34% that gain less than 600 euros. And how can we come here and ask an architect to do all this? Because we don't center ourselves in the actual problems of architecture, which is solving the problem with the housing crisis. It says all the architecture does thinking about a house, doing a hospital, thinking about a house, because the house is the base of architecture. If we think that during the break of 1940 and 2000 in the max, the the family gains 2000, the house couldn't be more than 50,000. But nowadays it's not honest nor fair for them to be able to get a house. This is indecent. And the horror studio, and the horror studios, they make houses with 15 to 30,000. But for this, we have to think that there's a lot of circumstances that change the price between houses. Till now, the price of houses has doubled. It isn't enough for us to think that architecture has to get to everyone. We have to think that how can it actually get to others? In that aspect, we can divide this objective in various platforms. The cost of a house implies the cost of the land. It implies the fiscal part. It implies a construction of garages. Because why should I have a house? Why should I have a car? Why should I have the need for a car? And thinking about the question of land can be 20 to 40% of the final price of the house. This is impossible to think about. The land that is a basic necessity shouldn't be a merchandise. But nowadays, we have that land as something akin to a merchandise. So we have to look at this problem and try to see what can we do, but how can we get through this problem and get further, especially when the person who's above us is able to freely get this kind of thing. But it's more than that. The plans define the uses without defining the type of uses that will actually be used. Housing, equipment, services. But what kind of housing will you get? Since it doesn't define the housing, it's the one is the most needed, it's going to be the more speculated part, which means that the prices will rise. So the people who have the least amount of money will be forced into the slums or the ghetto, making them depend on transportation while they do not have enough money to actually do it. So the municipality cannot make the need for housing need nothing else. So in Britain, either municipality allows for each municipality to actually choose the amount that it will be for each place. So it will not be generic housing. And so 40% will be for housing, 60% is for the other, and then the 10% can enter the public market. There are experiences like that in every area in the world, such as New York, where we have flats, where we have the first C20 flats being cheap and the other ones being hotels and luxury apartments, with the rich living up and the poor people living on the bottom floors. So the soil where it is built and it's seen as merchandise can't be an impulse for the market, but a tool for us to actually use it. And the municipality are slowly getting weaker because this tool is something that they can actually use. The first point is to actually get rid of the price that is speculated and guarantee that the people that have the least resources will be able to actually get these and be able to get the most attractive zones. It's not an option that this plan keeps going on. And the plans here in Portugal are the first plans where we can actually do this. The second point, 25% of the costs in a house are taxes. 20% it's the amount that again is for the people who make the house. So when the state says that they're worried, they're not actually. So the collection of RC means in the housing market that it's 60% of the collection. So the government is the one gaining the most out of it. With the collection of RC and the IRS, we see that the government gets a margin of winning. They get way more than what we actually think. Is this possible to change? I don't think it's very probable, because that would mean that the government would get less. All the records of gaining were the highest in the last few years, which means that the government is just taking more and more money, and it's very difficult to get by. We can just be here being naive and think, oh, things are as they are. In this legislation, we saw that the IVA would get raised. So the government went down, meaning that they had to go back on their option. So if we don't win, you guys will go back to being bad. And it's said that it would apply to all kinds of construction. Because in fact, when you buy a house that's 2 million, you will not be talking about, you will not be paying 6% in IVA, you'd be paying 26%. So that would change what is really housing and what's a commercial part. So now this is a negative impact on the people who actually need this. So there are people who do not bother themselves. There were apartments that we did that allowed us to sell them at 4 million euros. There's no justification for this. There's no reason for the IVA to be 6%. So we cannot be naive. So the question of taxes is a very important question that has to be talked about. And we can't accept that the first thing that we have to take into consideration is also that we need to have basic housing and not social. If the market isn't regulated, even if the IVA goes from 23 to 6, the houses will not change. The price will not change 70%. There's a sure, for sure about that. Because that would mean that the municipality or the state would have to actually change things. We're talking about an economy that bases itself on taking risks, because it's a paradox. In Portugal, the government is the one making the most money than the person who's speculating and only wins 20%. For us to make houses that are able to be built in under 50,000, we have to be more efficient as architects. And the example I will give about the island, which was a reevaluation of the island that we did, none of the compartments fit the legislation. For example, the garage. Why do we need garage? If we have urban options, why should we be focusing on having cars? So now people from this most recent generation, it's more my generation that's focusing on having cars. And so since rehabilitation for a building, but the minimal area, think they're bigger than they actually need to be. We have houses with ventilation. It had to do with the sunlight, that which are something that we don't no longer need because we have other solutions. So maybe this kind of thing is no longer needed. It's no longer, there's no longer a need to actually follow up with that. And there's also another thing that happens with the regulation, which is that we have minimal spaces to fit. We have to take into consideration summer and winter time. We have houses that We have houses that have transfers between the outside and indoors. We have equipments that cost a lot. And before it was obligatory, it would only be obligatory if we chose to. So in Saint Leonor, we chose to do it in a way that we could actually get an A+. It forces us to buy equipment in order to get the best grade. This is all a market instead of actually focusing on the need of people. And in that perspective, the regulation has to be put into cause. I was in a program with about the new legislation, and they were all saying that it wasn't. It was another argument for a cost, and it would make the situation more difficult for those who already don't have enough. So the house should be small without corridors. I'm talking about to the architects. And the only way to make an actual an actual way of doing a correct house, it should have more portal, and instead of having a lot of corridors and a lot of empty space. On the other hand, why do we need to have a house with 3 bedrooms, 1 living room, 1 bathroom, when we only go to the bathroom to sleep, and most of the day we're awake in the living room or the kitchen? So why do we have a part of the house that's closed off till we go to sleep? In fact, we could not reduce the area, but change the house into something that would be more extensive for collaborative areas, so that the room should could become a place for actually people to be in. For example, in Porto, there are stairs that go forward and backwards. It's not a kitchen, a living room. We make use of these spaces as we need. So, what's a living room today? It can become a room tomorrow. It's the main bedroom, and this is the other bedroom. When people can just make the house and put the bed wherever they want. So I have to find a way to be more efficient with the space. It make the house be able to, so we can use the house in a way that it's actually efficient, because if we're not using these areas, we could use them for something else. So making a house that's small around the space, and that way you can circulate around the house going through all the different spaces. There's a corridor that at night is closed. With that house, is it's very big, because if we think about it in a film way. We could think about going around the house and it doesn't change. It feels huge, and at night we can just close the house. I sorry for how long I'm taking. Thank you a lot.